This episode today is about 7 don'ts when presenting. I continue to be astonished at listening to and watching professional speakers, even at conferences, miss the mark. So I have been inspired, hot off the press, with 7 specific don'ts in your presentations. Stop doing these things, people. They are going to hinder your credibility. And more importantly, what's going to happen if you avoid these don'ts, and we'll talk about the do's as well as the don'ts. But if you avoid them, you're going to come across as a much stronger presenter, much more credible, much more trustworthy, and you're going to influence and stand out. So we want you to stand out in a positive way, not in a negative way. So the first one is avoid a bunch of pleasantries up front. I heard this, I probably heard 10 speakers in the last 2 days, and almost every one of them said some version of unnecessary fluff in the front. Things like, thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. Oh, it's so wonderful to have you all here. Isn't the weather great today? And you're just going, get to the point. Now, there's something about it that's interesting to me. My belief is that we do it because it makes us feel more comfortable. It feels like the thing to say. So then the second part of that is that we have been culturally conditioned to say that at the beginning of a presentation. It is completely unnecessary. It is so much better. So here's the do. First of all, avoid those things, but instead come right on stage and go straight into a story, a fact, a data point, something that is going to draw people's attention. I can remember years ago being in a presentation where every other speaker that had gone before me was saying the same old thing of like the thank yous in advance. And then one guy stood up and said, Henry Ford once said, don't find fault, find a remedy. And it was so powerful. Right out of the gates, he commanded that room. And I want all of you to command the rooms that you're in. And a way to do that is to start with that story and avoid that fluff in advance before you start talking. What also happens is because everyone is so used to it, and as an audience member, we're also culturally conditioned to hear it, it doesn't stand out. This is why when you actually do something different and add value in that thing that's different, you're going to come across as a lot more powerful. Number 2, don't draw attention to time or refer to other things that are happening that people are missing. So for example, this happened. I could not believe this. This woman that walked up on a stage, her talk was pretty good. But when she came up to the stage, the first thing she said, and by the way, this happened with 2 speakers, but I want to focus on this one speaker first. She came up and said something to the tune of, well, I'm the only thing standing between you and happy hour. And I thought, oh my gosh, suddenly now what happens is that pulls you out of the present moment and makes you feel like you wish you were somewhere else, or maybe you wish you were at happy hour instead of listening to her talk. So it's drawing attention elsewhere that we want to avoid. That same speaker throughout her hour-long talk kept drawing references to happy hour. Well, I know we want to get to happy hour. I know you want to get to happy hour. And even about 10 minutes in, she said something related to time, referencing rushing. For example, let's hurry through this so we can get you to happy hour. And I'm thinking, you've only been talking for 10 minutes. Don't you have an hour? That's what I have on my agenda here. So suddenly it makes people wonder, well, where else do I want to be? Or it makes people question, wait, how long was this? I thought the agenda said this. And ultimately, it takes people out of the present moment and they are not able to fully be with you as the speaker. So make sure that you definitely avoid drawing attention to time. Don't even talk about it. Just be there. Now, if, for example, you were going over, here's the time I would mention time. If you notice you're going over, because there's a lot of speakers that do that, and then that is very inconsiderate and disrespectful of other people's time. So instead, If you realize, oh my gosh, I need 10 more minutes and there is only 2 minutes left to the time frame that I had to speak. First of all, you should in advance know, you should know before 2 minutes is up in your talk that you have a lot more to cover. So I would say make sure that you're keeping track of time. And obviously, you do this by practicing in advance. But in the moment, what I do, if I am running over for some reason, usually it's because I've allowed for more space for people to engage and have conversations, then I will say, all right, we've got a few minutes left and I want to ask your permission. So I do one of two things. I want to ask your permission to go an extra 5 minutes. Is anybody not able to do that? And then you find out. And if they're not, then you make sure that you wrap it up on time and you go straight to your close and wrap it up nicely. You have to cut bait with the things that you wanted to say or wish that there was still time to say. But we have to remember that the audience only gets what we give them. So you don't have to give all that extra information. You just need to get to the end because you don't want people, nobody's going to wonder, wow, I really wish I had more information there, or what information did she miss? But everyone, most likely, will remember if you didn't close well or if you kept them longer than was on the agenda. That is a very important thing in that time management. The other thing I wanted to say related to this is that the second speaker came up on stage for a closing keynote. Now, keep in mind, we had all been together for 2 days. It's 4 o'clock. People probably do want to get to happy hour or get home. It was the last day of the conference. And she came up within her first sentence or two, said, I've got 55 minutes and I understand that I am the only thing standing between you and happy hour. And I'm thinking, not again. Are you kidding me? Don't bring up how much time you have to deliver the talk. Just talk. Use the time you have. Use it to focus people's brains on the content that you're delivering and the amazing person that you are. You don't want to take away from your credibility. Number three, some of this we've touched on a little bit already, but I wanted it to have its own separate category here. Don't apologize. Now, I also want to say if you have legitimately wronged someone in your audience, then maybe you need to apologize. But what I'm talking about here are apologizing for things that are unnecessary. Apologizing if you potentially did something or you talked over someone or you did whatever it might be. You don't want to apologize just because. And this relates very much to the one that I mentioned before, which is that apologizing almost for being up on stage, or I'm sorry that I'm keeping you late, or oh, I'm so sorry that my slides are blah, 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 or I'm sorry that you can't all hear me in the back. Well, that's a whole other bigger problem. Maybe there is a reason to apologize for that. But what I'm talking about is the apologizing unnecessarily. And if you truly did wrong someone, probably the best thing would be to handle that separately. But a lot of times people tend to apologize unnecessarily. Number four is don't miss the point. I cannot emphasize this one enough. In my experience, having coached thousands of people now, if people don't know why they're listening to you within a minute, and even probably more like 30 to 45 seconds now, they're going to tune out. As my mentor, Donald Miller, says, if people have to burn too many calories to figure out what you're trying to say, they're going to tune out. So make sure that you employ the US military term bottom line up front. That will serve you really well. Have that bottom line up front. So here's how you want to structure the beginning of a presentation. You start with a story or an anecdote, a data fact, a quote, something that's going to grab people's attention. And that's the first thing that you say when you walk on stage. Now, there might occasionally be exceptions based on the context where you might want to actually thank the person that introduced you, but be careful because that can be a trap. Once we say thanks, it seems as if we just automatically start saying, I'm so happy to be here. It's so great to be here. And that can be a trap that takes away from your credibility. So in general, you want to start right away with that story or anecdote, data fact, quote, and then go into create a connection between that story to your point. And be careful about saying things like, today I want to talk to you about. Just talk about it. Or I want to tell you a story. Don't do that. Just tell a story. It's going to be a lot more powerful. Imagine if I said to you, I want to tell you this story about when I was in Manhattan on Times Square, and it was really this amazing story that I'm going to tell you now, versus I was in Times Square and there were so many lights around me, I didn't know what to do. That's a very different thing. Painting a scene like that is going to be much more powerful than telling us what you're going to tell us. Be careful so much about that one. Go straight to the point, connect the dots for the audience of the story or anecdote, connecting to the point, and then get straight into your content. Well, that obviously is your content, but then get straight into the meat of the message. But make sure that you frame that message with an anchor point in the beginning so people immediately go, oh, now I know what this is about. You may or may not have even thought about this, but in the very beginning of this podcast episode, as with the majority, certainly of my more recent podcast episodes, I always say what it's about. This episode today is about blah, blah, blah. And that's going to make people immediately know and be informed of whether they want to keep listening or not. Many women hold back due to self-doubt, people pleasing, not wanting to rock the boat, fear of being judged, not wanting to say anything that would make them unpopular. There's so many different reasons why we hold back. And this is a problem. I did it far too long, and I don't want anybody to be held back from being their true and authentic self because we're missing opportunities and we leave money on the table. And if you relate to any of this, I would love to talk to you to see if it's a fit for you to join the Powerhouse. It is my mastermind community that helps women get promoted, move to that next level in their career in general, lead with authority, get better at public speaking, as well as negotiating. It all depends what you're trying to do, but it's ultimately about how to ditch that doubt and catapult your career with an incredibly supportive group of women, as well as individual coaching. If that even sounds remotely interesting, I would love to talk to you more about it and see if the Powerhouse is right for you. You can jump into the show notes and you'll see a link there where you can schedule a clarity call with me to see if it makes sense. Number 5 is don't call attention to mistakes. Too often what happens, and I remember I used to do this when I was first starting out as a corporate trainer. I remember when I would click on a slide and I didn't think that one was coming, I'd go, oops, really loud. And things like that, then draw your audience's attention to it. Stay silent. Most of the time, people haven't even noticed if you've made a mistake. Now, if it's obvious, then of course you can make light of it. You can say, oops, didn't mean to do that one. If you want, you've got to determine the context, use your best judgment in the moment. But overall, a lot of times we think that the mistake is much more magnified than it actually is in real life. So what you want to do is pause to gather your thoughts and then move on. And if you have incorporated pausing throughout your talk, which I highly recommend because that's directly linked to control, which is directly linked to credibility, then it won't be so strange when you pause if and when you made a mistake or you fumbled or something like that. Pause is your best friend. Make sure that you use it so that you can come across with more credibility and control and help you from taking any focus off of a mistake or something that you might even be judging yourself for in the moment. You have to remember that most people are not thinking about you during your presentation. They are thinking about themselves and maybe what other people in the room are thinking about them or how this is relevant to them. We as human beings are naturally self-focused. I have to call a spade, folks. That is the way it is. So the good news about that is that people are not fixated on you as much as you think that they are. Number 6, don't have slides that are bad. Let me explain what I mean. Don't have ineffective slides. Don't have slides that are busy or hard to read. Another thing that happened at this conference, and even the woman next to me whispered in my ear and she goes, wow, that slide contrast is horrible. The woman used a design where the colors were so similar that it was really hard to see the contrast, especially when we were in a group of 50 people, maybe even more. It was really hard to see that contrast. So make sure that you have really powerful color contrast so that people can see the slides. And then also make sure that they are not so busy. You don't want to have multiple points and using all of the margin. You got to give people some space to breathe. You want to have the point that you're talking about on the slide at the time that you're talking about it, and then move on to the next point, and even better, black out your slide. You may not realize this, but incorporating literal black slides into your presentation will, when people are watching that back, they won't show up at all. They don't show up as black. They just look, it just looks like there's nothing on the screen or the slideshow. I would not recommend this in a virtual presentation, however, because people might go, wait, what happened to the slides? Your slides are malfunctioning. But I would recommend that you put black slides into your slides before and after each concept or point, because you don't want to have a bunch of stuff on the slides and people then are going to be distracted. They're going to be looking at your slides, trying to figure out what the heck is all of this, and then they're not even listening to you. It's impossible for us to fully focus on a speaker talking and busyness on a slide. This is why you have to decide, what do you want your audience to do? Do you want them to read or do you want them to listen to you? I would expect that you would want them to listen to you. And remember that visual aids are just that, visual aids for you as the presenter. Your presentation, those slides, are not the presentation. That is not the presentation. You are the presentation. The slides, all they should do is complement what you're saying. This is why that best rule of thumb is to think one concept at a time that I'm talking about. As soon as you're done talking about it, then put it on a black slide. Now, if you are somebody that needs lots of data and you have to deliver that, you can put that up there. I would still recommend one concept at a time. Or if you've got a big graph, throwing up each thing on the graph one at a time as you talk through it, whether you call that an animated slide or a build slide, either terminology wise, it doesn't really matter. The point is, talk about one thing at a time on that slideshow. And if you do it that way, people will be much more engaged with you, and you might even get some compliments on your slides and how you use them. Be careful about throwing up an Excel spreadsheet, which is ultimately just a projected document on a slide. Now, if for some reason you are totally limited, you don't have control over what's being presented, somebody else writes the slides, you have to do them that way because somebody said you needed to, although I would still question that. But what I would say, if in that case, then let people know. There's a lot of things on this slide. I'm going to walk through each of them, but then give them a chance to breathe by blacking out the screen. And that can be really helpful. Another rule of thumb with this is when people are discussing something, that's a really great time to black out the slide because you most likely don't need the slide anymore. It's similar to a virtual meeting when you take it off of presentation mode and then people can see each other more rather than being the slide or the screen being dominated by the slide. We want to be able to connect, see people's faces, and have those discussions. So I could do a whole multiple talks on slides, but the most important thing is to keep them simple. Don't have a lot of points or data at once. Build us up to that full picture. And then also remember the power of visuals. Let's face it, it's a lot easier to put a bunch of words on a slide. It's a lot harder because it takes more intention to think about the flow of your slides and having pictures in between the data. But it is so worth it when you think about what actually influences people, and that will make a difference. Number 7, don't end flat. This is our last tip. Don't end flat. Don't close. And what I mean by that is don't have a flat close. Too often what happens is we do the body of our message. We have our opening, our body, and then we usually fall flat. Something like, okay, that's all I have to say to you about this. And it ends flat. No, you want to wrap that up with reminding people about the point. It might sound strange to you, but you remind them, again, what we talked about today is this. And here's the action. So what do you want them to do about it? In the next week or the next time you blah, 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 then this is where I would suggest that you da da da. So give them a call to action, something to do as a result of your talk. And then end with a story or an example, something that is going to really highlight it. Let's say, for an example, let's just do a recap here in an example. Let's say I started with a talk on running. And I started with a whole story about how I started out running in high school and I always loved it. It was so fun. And I told you a whole story about that. And then I said, and this is why we're here today, to focus on the power that running can have for your health. Right there is my point. Then I go straight into the content points that I want to make. And then my close would be something like, again, we've talked about the power that running can have for your health. In the next week, what I'd suggest that you do is buy a pair of running shoes and give it a try. Run around the block, see how it feels to you. And then end with another story or an example. I want to share an example of somebody else in my running club that blah, 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 blah. And when you can do something like that, it creates this nice frame at the beginning as well at the end, because you want to have that strong opening, nice meaty body, but not too complex with limited slides. And then make sure that you wrap that up strong with the point of the message, the action you want your audience to take, and a story, anecdote, data point, or example. The more you can incorporate stories throughout your message, even better. And that is what's going to draw people's attention to you. So let's do a quick recap here. Number one, don't say a bunch of fluff up front. Get straight to it, tell the story or example, and then your point. Number two, don't draw attention to time, such as happy hour that you're missing, or I've got X amount of minutes left. Number three, don't apologize unnecessarily. Number four, don't miss the point. Get straight to it and make sure it's clear and relevant to the audience. Number five, don't call attention to mistakes. Most people won't even notice. Pause instead. Take time to gather your thoughts. Number six, don't have slides that are ineffective, such as busy slides or too hard to read and not enough margin. Make sure they're simple, you've got good visuals, and you don't have a lot of words. And then number seven, don't end flat with your close. Make sure you have a strong close so people will feel it. And one thing I will also say related to this is make sure that not only your content is strong, but make sure that you end strong with your voice. What I mean by that is have vocal conviction, end your sentence with a period with the last thing that you say so people know you're done. You don't want anybody wondering, is she finished? Because a lot of times if we say, and that's what I have to say about running, you're going, what? What's coming next? And that's what I have to say about running. Much better, stronger conviction in your voice. And that's what's going to help you stand out with more credibility and connection. And as a matter of fact, it made me think about one of my clients who was hesitant to start with a story. But when she did, she got so many people afterward that said, oh my gosh, that was amazing. That was incredible. I'm so glad you told that story. And she shared more, or they shared more with her because it opened up a whole dialogue around that discussion. So you never know what is going to come from these things. I have also got a client who had a great example when he was presenting at a boardroom. He said, you know, I always come in there. I'm trying to figure out what's going to make this different. I usually just start with all the numbers and put up a projected document. And after working with me, he said, okay, I'm going to try something different. And we were brainstorming ideas for him. And I said, well, what are you really passionate about? And then he goes, oh, I've got it. I am going to use the example of what happens. He goes, I'm going to ask the board this question. When you walk into a sporting event, what's the first thing that you look at after you get your beer and popcorn? The scoreboard. So he said, this is exactly what I'm doing today. I'm showing you the scoreboard of our business. And I remember thinking, that was so great. And he could have missed the mark on that. He could have just gone in like he always does and delivered the information with all the numbers. But this was different because he told that story and it made all the difference. So those are a couple of examples. And by the way, I have a group mastermind. If you are interested in learning more about how to present yourself better, public speaking, how to negotiate, how to stand out in meetings with more credibility and command the respect that you deserve, check out the Powerhouse. It is a group mastermind that I have along with one-on-one coaching, and it will help you get the results that you need, potentially, if we're the right fit. Who knows? But it's certainly worth having a conversation. And I would love to hear from you if that even catches your ear or eye to say, I want to hear more about that. So looking forward to connecting with you. And until next time, I'm Karen Laos signing off.
If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.